Hey, everybody. Welcome to ClaibsOnline. I'm Mike Claiborne, but this is all about Huddle Up with Howard. We are back for season number 2. Howard Richards, former All-American at the University of Missouri, Dallas Cowboy for a number of years, and now a color analyst for the University of Missouri on the football side, is with us. And Howard, first of all, it's good to be back, man. Here we are. Another season of football is right up on us.
I know. Can you believe it? I think the time from the end of the college football season in January until now, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's because you and I are getting older, but it has flown by. And it may be going fast for you, but
you know, I'm just kind of like that, man. You know, I'm a slow motion guy, man. I don't want to run the coverage anymore. Let's just put it that way.
I hear you. No, it's exciting for a number of reasons. I mean, there's so much to talk about, so much movement in college football with teams changing conferences. Of course, we've got name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal. Those things seem to be like old news now. But, you know, it's exciting. This Missouri team has got a lot of new puzzle pieces that are going to be counted on early. And I think we're just as excited to see, you know, from a fan base, what this team will actually do, especially in the early quarter of the season.
All right, well, let's start off at the top of the list. Let's talk about the top teams. You know, one of the things about college football, a lot of things just don't change. It's going to be Alabama. It's going to be Ohio State. The same cast of characters. Somebody might slip in like a Cincinnati last year or Utah. But basically, the strong don't get weak. You may have some schools that knock on the door, and by the time they find greatness, they're on probation. I mean, you know, it just never fails. And I'm not saying anybody's pending probation this year, but the same teams just keep getting better. And I guess the conversation always starts with Alabama. And, you know, you might want to include Ohio State. And then there's Georgia and some other programs that have really made some hay. But do you see anybody that's different than those top 6 teams in the country?
Not really. You should probably, I mean, depending on how well they do, especially early, Notre Dame is always in the conversation. You know, Clemson is a team that can sneak in there also. Michigan, you know, what's Michigan going to do this year? But then you've got teams like, you know, that could sneak up from the 2 teams that are going to be coming to the SEC. You know, Blue Bloods, they've struggled in the past, but Oklahoma and Texas, those programs, or, you know, even though they haven't been battling for national championships of late, you can never count them out because they have such great resources. What's USC going to do this year with Lincoln Riley at the helm? So, again, it's going to be so many different angles to college football this season. And I think it's going to keep our interest, you know, from the opening kickoff until the very last playoff game. Because in some ways, I think those teams at the top are more equal than they have been in the past, with the exceptions of maybe Alabama and Georgia. Georgia finally, after 40 years of teetering at the top, finally broke through and won a national championship. What will they do coming back in 2022 after losing a number of players? So certainly things to watch this college football season, but I'm just happy it's getting started tomorrow night, September 1st, Thursday night football for the Mizzou Tigers versus the Louisiana Tech Bulldogs.
So when we look at these teams, and I think there's a half a dozen teams that are legit, and you just mentioned them. And I'm sure there's somebody, because of scheduling and they get a break, they'll break through. But when it's all said and done, we'll be talking about the same 6-7 teams in December. But with that said, the conference look, you touched on a little bit with Texas and Oklahoma going to the SEC. I'm of the belief that by 2025, I think we'll see these Power 5 conferences secede from the NCAA as we know it. We'll have 18, maybe 20 team conferences. And you know, it may be, and it may be there may be 60 programs in the country that represent Division I football as we know it. Because I think these schools are going
top half of the FBS. You're right. I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt.
they're going to load up, and I think what I'd like to see though is relegation, like we see in soccer in Europe. Like if you don't maintain a certain standard, if you don't have a decent record in your division, guess what? You drop down. Then you get a chance to play for that championship at that next level. And if you win, then we welcome you back. But if not, we'll take the champion from that next level. They have a 3-year process on how they can proceed. And if they don't, then guess what? We'll find somebody else. I like the competition at the bottom that's going to make the competition at the top good. So hopefully we'll see that. But I'm firmly of the belief that the NCAA, as we see it now, is about to be a thing of the past. They'll rewrite their own rules with regarding transfer portal, NIL, eligibility, all those things that they toil and wrestle with now with the NCAA. They're going to write their own rules to make it more conducive for them to be more competitive. They'll cut their own TV deal, and because they'll eliminate the middleman. And I think that they'll be in great shape. I think college football is going to have a different look completely. But as we speak, we've got some interesting conferences to look at. And I think obviously it starts with the SEC. So my question to you is, who's the second best conference?
Probably.
And I'm not saying, and the reason why I ask you that, because I know I can say to you, well, Big Ten, Ohio State, Michigan, I really kind of look at the way it works from the bottom up, because I think when I look at the SEC, I know Alabama and Georgia, those schools are always going to be good. But the Vanderbilts and the Kentuckys and the Missouris of the world who are making that climb, they create a greater balance within the conference compared to, let's say, the Big 12, and whoever their lowest rung on the ladder is. Let's just use Kansas State for an example. Kansas State couldn't hold a candle to many of the other comparable conferences as far as their standing is concerned.
So if you just look at the SEC, look at a team like Missouri that, so many people said could never compete in this conference. Well, and I go back to years 2 and 3, 2013, 2014, Missouri won the SEC East in consecutive years. There are teams that have been in the Southeastern Conference, known as the SEC, since its inception, for a lot longer time than Missouri, that have never played in a conference championship. So for those naysayers that want to throw Missouri out, guess what? You're going to have to throw a lot of other teams out as well.
Oh, it's a whole lot of teams to be on that bus. When you want to throw them out, there's about 4 or 5 other teams we can put on that same bus, and then you're back to square one.
Yeah. So that's just, people that have nothing else to do, that's what they talk about. Missouri's going nowhere. Teams like Vanderbilt, which has a different structure. Vanderbilt's the only private school in the Southeastern Conference. So they play by a different set of rules. And from a facility standpoint, it's going to be more difficult for Vanderbilt to catch up. They just do things differently there. But the other schools are all trying to make that climb, whether it's South Carolina. We've seen Kentucky. And I think the Kentucky Athletics Administration has done it the right way, because they have given Mark Stoops time to build a program. And I think for those programs that are hungry for success that haven't had it, if you look at where Kentucky was 10 years ago when Stoops arrived, and now look at where Kentucky is, they have, ascended every year. They've gotten better and better and better, which is what a lot of programs. Tennessee has been down. They're trying to do the same thing under Josh Heupel. Shane Beamer at South Carolina, in his first season, he gave the Gamecocks a lot of reason for hope. What can he continue to do there? Same with Missouri. There's a lot of, speculation about what this 2022 team will do in Missouri. So teams are on the rise. So it gives credence to what you said about the teams that are at the bottom being more competitive, which ultimately I think pushes that level of competition towards the top, and makes it a little more interesting. Yeah, I can't say that Georgia and Alabama will always be there. In the early 2000s, Alabama had its troubles. And so anything is possible, maybe less possible as long as Nick Saban is running the show, because he's the gold standard, in my opinion, in college football.
There's no doubt. Hey,
But
let's
it
take
is.
our first. Let's
Go
take our
ahead.
first break. We'll come back and talk a little bit more. See, I kind of look at Alabama as like being a 500-year flood. I mean, I think they'll be around for a while. Nick
Yeah.
has set such a standard, but we'll come back and talk more about this after you hear from our friends from Emory, Illinois.
The future of electric vehicles is beginning to grow across the Midwest, but there's a lot of work to be done before most people will feel comfortable switching from gas to EV. Ameren, Illinois President and Chairman Richard Mark gives us some insight into how they're preparing by adding more electric vehicle charging stations.
Our vision is to basically have charging stations every 60 miles or so, from Cook County all the way to the tip of the state down to the Kentucky area, and then across the state, east and west, going toward Kansas and Iowa to the west, and going toward Indiana to the east. And so we feel that within the next few years, we'll probably add, we're hoping to add 60 to 70 a year over the next 5 years to really complete that infrastructure for the entire Midwest. In fact, the Midwest now has all the utilities in the Midwest are joining together to coordinate that. So, which is the first time it's ever happened that you've had Wisconsin say, okay, we're going to build our charging stations here, and Illinois say, okay, well, we can tap on here, and Missouri, this makes sense for us. So we can expand that north, south, east, and west by coordinating with the other utilities.
St. Louis Acura has an unbeatable selection of new cars arriving daily, like the all-new 2023 Acura Integra. We also have a great selection of over 200 pre-owned and factory precision courtesy vehicles with finance rates as low as 1.9% for 36 months with approved credit. And we've added Saturday service hours to our newly renovated service facility. Don't forget, we'll buy your vehicle here at our dealership or from the convenience of your home. St. Louis Acura, better than ever for you.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Huddle Up with Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne, and we're talking some college football as we wrap things up about the SEC. Howard, what teams we already know about Alabama and Georgia. Obviously Auburn's got some issues. They can't figure out how to treat their athletic director. But what other teams in the conference do you want to pay attention to? I would think Tennessee would be in that conversation, and certainly Kentucky.
Definitely, and adding one more to that equation would be Texas A&M.
Oh yeah. He's recruited well the last couple of years, so we should see the fruit from his tree soon.
Yeah, it has, and of course, there's a lot of controversy sparked in the offseason between A&M coach Jimbo Fisher and, of course, Nick Saban. And Fisher was a protege of Nick Saban, so he understands Nick as well as anyone. And of all of the teams that, or all the assistant coaches that have coached under Nick, last year, Jimbo Fisher was the first one to actually beat him. Then, of course, Kirby Smart did it in the he beat him in the championship game, if you will. So that was a little bit of a down year for Alabama, although, I'm never counting out Nick Saban because I think things like that will absolutely motivate him. And I don't know that there is an entity or a person or coach in college football that can turn the light switch and turn up the juice any more strong than Nick Saban can. It seems like the more adversity he faces, the better he becomes. He
loves the challenge. There's no doubt about it. All right. I asked you earlier, we probably unanimously agree on SEC being the cream of the crop. Give me the other two best conferences.
Well, certainly the Big Ten. I think you have to look at what the Big Ten has done year in and year out. Now, it's always been Ohio State and Michigan, much like in the SEC, you've got Georgia, Alabama. But there have been some other teams that have made some noise of late. Wisconsin had a good run not too long ago. Penn State, of course, now that they're in it, Penn State is a team that you've always got to reckon with. And I think, Michigan State is another team that behind Mel Tucker as its head coach is a team that you've got to pay attention to. Now you add those other two teams, SC and
UCLA.
LA to the equation, how does that change the makeup of the Big Ten? I don't know if it makes them stronger or if it will actually somewhat weaken those teams that are traveling from the West Coast. Because that's those are long flights on your road trips going from West all the way through the Midwest. I don't know that it's going to be a factor immediately. I don't know if teams maybe will travel a day earlier instead of the day before. I think those.
What about this though? What if because we now have learned that virtual learning is something we can comprehend. What if you're a team that's playing back-to-back weeks in another time zone, and you set up virtual learning for your students? You keep them somewhere, whether it's a campus or wherever in a hotel, where they can still practice, still have their classroom work, because you can afford to do anything. Now, you can put teachers on a plane if you want to, but to continue to maintain an educational environment, and as I mentioned, because of the virtual learning, I wouldn't be surprised to see a team say, instead of us going back and forth, if we're going to play 2 back-to-back home road games in, let's say, Illinois and Indiana, why don't we just find a place in Chicago, make that our home base, and we'll get our education done. We'll be able to still practice. We'll deal with the weather elements as well. And instead of going back and forth and losing practice time, and as you mentioned, the travel can be a load, or it can be a load on young people and old people.
Yeah, no doubt.
So, and I think I would look at doing something like, I'd try and be creative as far as the scheduling is concerned, where if I'm going to be on a road trip, you're going to go 2 games at a time. You're not going to go to Indiana and then have a home game. You're not going to go back and forth. You're going to play 2 road games in a row, and you'll get 3 home games in a row. And the university who's coming to see you, they just played both teams while they're out there.
I think it makes perfectly good sense. And, the precedents there, NFL teams have been doing that. A team like Atlanta or Miami, Miami situated in the far southeastern corner of the United States. You got to go to Seattle. I don't know how many miles they're at, but it's probably over 5,000 miles. Then they play, let's say, San Francisco the next week. It makes sense to eliminate 10 hours of flying time by just hanging out either in Seattle for a week, or you travel somewhere closer to San Francisco to get your work in. There are any number of facilities that can accommodate and would be willing to accommodate, whether it's a pro team or a FBS college football team as well. So I think it makes sense. And I think it would not surprise me if the scheduling in the future, once those teams once they officially join, the scheduling will be done in accordance with what we just talked about.
All right. So now we agree on both of those conferences, which means the ACC and the Pac-12, soon to be Pac-10 or whatever, is going to be a little light. Would there be some cross-pollination between those 2 conferences? Because I really believe that there's going to be 3 bona fide conferences, perhaps 4, and everybody else is going to be FBS, and whether they like it or not, unless they can come up with something legit and put together 4 or 5 competitive teams that could be bowl worthy and not go in a bowl and get their asses handed to them. So I think you got to take that into account. But where does the ACC and also the Pac-12 or Pac-10 go once this transfer takes place?
The biggest issue with those 2 conferences standing alone is geographically where they're situated. ACC on the East Coast, Pac-12 on the West Coast. Will they somehow be augmented into those existing conferences, comprising multiple super conferences? Could it be?
What about if the Big 12 absorbs the ACC and the Pac-12 and set up regional conferences?
Those are all things that are in play, and they all make sense. And ultimately, you can have a playoff, a regional playoff. Teams in the West play the teams in the East, and have an ultimate, college football championship. I do believe that we're looking at an ultimate college football playoff that looks like what they do at the professional level, by divisions per se, or by conference, if you will. Not necessarily by rankings. Rankings are just too. They just
never
don't.
liked them.
You're based on opinion and not on not by performance for the most part. And I think it complicates it. And I think a lot of teams that probably have been worthy have been left out as a result of that.
Well, you know what? It's funny as we talk about rankings, and you're right, they're opinions. So I'm a voter. How many games can I see on Saturday to actually warrant a legitimate vote? So let's just say I go to a game, I watch a game in the evening, and then one late night. So I can watch 6 teams play. Of the 6 teams, maybe 2 of them are vote worthy. The rest of them really don't count. So how can I assess what Alabama did when I didn't see him play? Only thing I do is look at the score. I don't know what happened. I mean, I'm just looking at the score, looking at the box score, maybe reading a story about him. And my opinion says, well, Alabama's a great team. Well, you know what? Maybe there was some situations that took place where somebody got hurt or whatever. I mean, there's so many intangibles that come into play that I've always felt that the human vote was insignificant because they just don't see enough people. And now they're voting on reputation. Yeah, they're voting on the spread, on what the spread says. I think there's got to be a better way.
There is a better way. And I think you get rid of these rankings. I mean, even the preseason rankings.
Which are the worst.
Yeah. And schools and players, and writers, they get so worked up. And the fans, so worked up about these rankings. Like, people, they mean nothing. They mean nothing. It's all going to boil down to how well your team performs, how many wins and losses. And then the points you made about who you see. I mean, yeah, you might see Alabama win a game or Georgia win a game, but they may look sloppy. They may not be good doing so against a weaker team. And that weaker team probably played far, far better than maybe what they were expected of them to play. And then you think, maybe they're a better team, and maybe I should give some credence to what they do on that level. But I would love to see the rankings go away. I would like to see this thing evolve. I'd like to see the college football playoff system evolve. 4 teams, representing 130 FBS teams. Is that really representation?
Yeah,
I don't think
you're
so.
right. It's all about reputation. Yeah. All right, moving right along. Let's talk about the impact that college football is dealing with now that we've had a full season of the transfer portal, and now NIL is now in place. Its impact on college football as you see it, and where do you think it goes from here?
Your head coaches are going to have to work harder. It's just that plain and simple. And I say that because, look at NIL in the state of Missouri. Legislation was passed recently that the head coaches and administration can actually help negotiate deals for players on their roster, which I think in a lot of ways that's good. But by the same token, it takes your head coach away from what he's coaching.
Exactly.
So it complicates it. So you're going to, I think what you end up seeing is head coaches, if they've got to be part of that NIL, whether it's recruiting or luring guys in as transfers, more responsibility is going to fall on the coordinators. In some cases, the coaches are doing that anyway. The coordinators are running the show. Your head coach acts more like a CEO. Of course, that's very common practice in the National Football League. I think you're going to see more and more of it in college, but also I think it puts more pressure on head coaches to win and to win now because there's so much movement. And then you've got now players can earn money from their name, their images, and likenesses of all of that. So players now, the distraction of having money as opposed to focusing on just school and football in and of itself, or basketball, just focusing on basketball. They're worried about, how many deals can I get? How much money can I make in this short window of time? I think that poses a distraction as well that we've never seen. And I don't even know what the ultimate impact will be. I don't think anyone knows. But it has to be something that we got to pay attention to. Now, I am all in favor of some sort of mechanism that levels the playing field, if you will, amongst, the sports, all college sports, so that your blue blood programs don't continue to always attract the best and brightest. Now, I will say this, until they increase scholarship numbers, you're still going to be limited as to how many people that you can bring in. But I still say the best players as it stands now, without that national legislation, if you will, the best teams are going to get probably the best players. And that's what's going to continue to perpetuate that imbalance at the top. So if there's a way that you can, again, make it more even, then listen, I'm all for it. And I hope that the people that are responsible for this, get on it sooner rather than later, before the sport just goes in a completely different direction and it just turns fans off. A lot of fans don't like it right now, but you've got to embrace it right now, because that's the way it is. With the transfer portal, the same thing. Coaches have to work harder. It's more like free agency. They've got to pay attention to where the best players are that fit the best needs for their particular teams, and then you go get them. How does this hurt high school recruiting? It may hurt it some.
It will,
because
I agree.
You now, where you might have had 15 spots for your top high school recruits. If you need to go get an experienced player to fill a need right now that wants to leave his institution, that's the guy you're probably going to get that can give you a year or two, as opposed to developing a raw freshman recruit.
Well, I agree with you all across the board. And I also think this, and I'll use Eli Drinkwitz as a classic example. Eli Drinkwitz has 2 years to make sure that Luther Burden is a happy player, and brings in more competitive players where they can win. Because by year 3, he transfers to an Alabama or an Ohio State, and all of a sudden he's on a team that has a chance to be a national champion. And the best example is Jamison Williams. Jamison Williams basically didn't do much at Ohio State. He says, I'm out of here. All of a sudden he's eligible to play at Alabama. He's the best receiver in the country. Ends up being a first-round pick and probably would have been a top 5 pick had he not been injured. I think you're going to see that blue chip player give that school 2 years to get it together. And if not, it's adios. I'm going to the highest bidder who's got the best chance to make me look like a better pro for the next level. Because none of these guys are going to be here for 4 years.
Yeah.
They're all out of here after 3. And I get it. So it is what it is. And you're right. We're going to have to get used to it. I think that if you're a head coach, you hire someone, maybe it's an agent or maybe an aspiring agent who has a lot more in common with young people to run that department. And you say to him, all right, every Wednesday, I'm going to make my phone calls to that individual or whomever, and I'm going to give him the FaceTime or the time he needs. But you better make sure this guy's worth my time investment, because I'm trying to put a game plan together. I'm trying to recruit other players. I need to make sure my time is used in a proper manner. Because if he has to do it, A, he's not equipped for it. B, he doesn't have the time to try and train himself. And C, it doesn't really interest him because he's not writing up plays. He's not developing a game plan. He's not being what a college football coach is supposed to be. This is just another tentacle to a long arm of a lot of things that are going on as far as the title of being a head coach. So, I think that I'm going to farm some of this out. And obviously the athletic department is going to have some more cubicle space because they're going to need some more people to hire.
And here's the other thing. How will they do it if they are not getting the same types of donations as they had in the past?
Yeah.
Now that money is going towards paying your student athletes.
Well, let me ask you this question, and that's a great point, Shemaine, bring up. So if I'm the athletic director, I'm recruiting boosters to give donations so we can add to the weight room, or we can travel better, or we can do this or do that. Now I've got to go to that booster and say, hey, we need some money for Johnny, whoever. He's a wide receiver or offensive tackle who wants an NIL deal. That booster's going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to write out a check. You need to figure out what it's going to go to, because I'm not writing out two. Now you're competing amongst yourself, and you're competing against yourself and the other departments, whether it's the basketball department or the track and field or the baseball. I just think the pie is going to get divvied up a lot more, which means you have to do two things. You have to go find new boosters, and you need to ask for more from that big-time booster, and make sure you allocate enough for NIL along with the other projects that you want to develop on campus.
You're much like coaching staffs or hiring beaucoup amounts of
quality assistance.
Yeah, your departments, your athletic departments are going to have to hire additional people in their development staffs, or whatever you want to call their fundraising staffs, because it's going to require that. In addition to the donations that the athletic department is used to getting, now you've got to find these donors that want to join, or that you want to join those, what we call the NIL collectives, these conglomerates, these organizations that get together strictly to address funding paying players. With Missouri, I think they have two. There are other schools that have more collectives, and I think they reach different areas, different parts of your program. But that's what you're going to have to do. That's what I see. I don't see it. I don't see it any differently right now. But I think that's what it's going to take in order to keep pace with the schools at the top.
We're going to take a final break, come back, talk a little Mizzou football. They're in action in Columbia. Louisiana Tech will be well, I don't know what do I want to say. I know we should say opponent, but maybe blood donor. We'll come back and talk about it after this.
They are St. Louis Cardinals forever, but every career must come to an end. This season, we say farewell to some of the most legendary players to ever wear the birds on the bat. After countless memories that will always be a part of St. Louis Cardinals history, we invite you to join us for another. Tickets are available to witness the storybook ending. Don't miss your chance to see these Cardinal greats for the last time at Busch Stadium. Get your tickets now at Cardinals.com.
From our roots in St. Louis, Royal Banks of Missouri is branching out to continue serving you with our locations in St. Charles, Jerseyville, Granite City, and now in Hannibal, Center, and New London. Royal Banks of Missouri, the community bank in your community.
Final segment with Huddle Up with Howard. Howard Richards is our guest. It's his show. I'm Mike Claiborne. And Howard, Mizzou opens up against Louisiana Tech tomorrow. And, Missouri is a team that's trying to find their way. They had a very good recruiting season. They really feasted off the transfer portal as well. So give me your assessment on this program, where it's at. What are you looking for at the outset?
I think this is a pivotal year for Eli Drinkwitz in this program, not a critical year. I say that because you've got a number of the puzzle pieces from one of the best recruiting classes Missouri's ever had, probably since 1977. I know some guys that are in their class. Maybe one, maybe two. Yeah, okay. Your listeners have to go back and do their own research. They'll raise some questions. They'll be looking through the annals like, why do you mention 1977? Well, they got to go find some film first, or if it hasn't already eroded at this point. Right. Yeah, exactly. So those factors, I think, the intrigue of this 2022 class. Gone are the days when you're recruiting specifically for depth and to build your program that way. With the transfer portal, you're bringing in players that can have an immediate impact, mixing in with a number 4 and 5 star players that you hope can make your opening day too deep. Missouri has one on its roster, Luther Burden III, who, is an incredible talent. But remember, as of today's August 31st, he's not taken one snap yet in the SEC. So what I caution fans about is try not to put too much pressure on this young man too soon. He knows what's expected of him. He knows what he's capable of doing. But by the same token, as the head coach, you don't want to force feed him to put a lot of pressure on this young man so that, if something goes wrong, he then loses a lot of confidence and his effectiveness goes down the drain. You want to feed it to him slowly, see what he can handle, and then continue to give him more. If he has that aptitude to be able to get it faster, then you give him more. But listen, from the standpoint of this entire team's makeup, the wide receiver group and I think the secondary are the best units that this team has to offer. From a standpoint of experience, mostly guys that they've brought in. I think there were some injuries last year, especially in the receiver room, that I think these guys are healthy now. And I think they're going to be difference makers, hopefully early on. Brady Cook is a young man that I think if you just look at his numbers from the opportunities that he's gotten on the field, he's taken advantage of it. Now, what I have seen of Cook, what I think of him right now is that he's a young man that's going to get better the more he plays. So I think his ceiling is high right now until, he shows me something otherwise. From an overall defensive standpoint, there are a lot of holes that needed to be addressed, especially if you look at the way this team started early in the season. They couldn't stop the run, couldn't stop anybody. But those holes have been addressed, at least on paper. Now it's up to those players that are going to line up on September 1st to start, earning their worth. They have to be able to stop the run. You've got to get pass rush. A lot of pressure on these quarterbacks, especially a team like Louisiana Tech. Sonny Cumbie is a protege of Mike Leach. The last time Missouri played Mike Leach was at the end of the 2020 season in a loss to Mississippi State. And Mississippi State put up not only 51 points, they actually rushed the ball more than they threw it. I mean, it was crazy to see a Mike Leach team that had no running game. They put up, maybe like 170 yards rushing, which was kind of an embarrassment for Missouri. But now that's 2 years ago. This is a different season, okay? This is a team that I think really from a confidence standpoint, they expect to be able to compete and win a lot of those games that they would have lost, say, a year ago or even 2 years ago. A lot of pressure that they put on themselves. I think the players have a lot of pride. They certainly don't want a repeat of the beginning of 2021. The expectations are high from the fans. They've got to play well. You want to get people in the stands, and that comes from not just getting wins, but looking good doing so. Especially on September 1st, you're playing in front of a national audience. It's really imperative for this team to come out and look good on national TV.
Let me ask you something, because you didn't touch on, I think, the critical positions of a team that's trying to establish themselves. What about this offensive line, and what about the running game? Because as good as your quarterback might be and as good as Luther Burden could be, if you don't have a run support to give him a chance to do other things, it's going to be pretty hard to get anything accomplished. So where does Missouri stand with the offensive line? And who's going to replace Beatty? I mean, he was an integral part of the team last year.
So let's start with the running backs room. And I think what Tyler Beatty, and I just saw yesterday he was cut by the Ravens, third round pick. It was kind of shocking to me because I thought this kid was going to make it, and he still might catch him with some other team. But it was really a surprise. But what Beatty did for this team last year, leading the SEC in rushing with 1,604 yards, caught 50 balls out of the backfield, and was a true leader on this team last year. And what the year before, what Larry Roundtree III provided for this team. I think those two examples have been solidified in that running backs room. Those guys were gold standards, if you will. Curtis Looper, I think, is one of the best running backs coaches in all of college football. And I think the young players that played behind Beatty and Roundtree the past couple of years, I think they understand that. And that's why I think, whoever gets the ultimate start, whether it's Elijah Young or Cody Schrader, will know what the expectations are of them. Now, that said, your success is always going to be, offensively, is always going to be on how well your line either protects the quarterback or opens holes for your running backs. Missouri lost a key player last year, really two key players in Mike Maietti at center, who gave them 2 tremendous years at center. And then Case Cook, who was hurt a lot last year. He missed probably 2/3 of the season. But Javon Foster returns at left tackle, preseason All-SEC pick, a guy that has continued to hone his skills and really study and is really growing into that position. Connor Tolleson, who's the heir apparent to Maietti at center, is a guy that's got a lot of talent. The other guys that are going to slide into those other starting positions have had lots of time. They've had playing time. They've had a couple starts amongst them. So I'm a little less concerned about how well they're going to play because they do have a lot of experience. And I have a lot of faith in what Marcus Johnson is able to do as an assistant coach. He's seemingly recruiting the types of players that are going to perform well in the system that Missouri runs offensively. So again, the success of the offense is going to rely heavily on those 2 positions. But my concern isn't where it is this year as it was last year, even with the new faces.
All right. Well, a lot to unpack with the University of Missouri and certainly college football this season. Howard Richards, it's always good to visit with you, sir. We'll be doing this on a weekly basis, talking about college football and certainly the NFL when it rolls out next week. So we thank you for your time. We invite everybody to check us out. We'll be here every week talking some football. We call it Huddle Up with Howard. Howard Richards. I'm Mike Claiborne. For Howard, I'm Mike. We thank you for watching, and we hope you have a chance to tune in to us next week. We'll come back with another edition and figure out just how smart we really are. So have a great week, everyone.